Again, hope you never run into it from that point of view. Now, the rest of this chapter, and like I said, it's worth a read through because it gives you a feel for how different and how much more complex in some ways government financial accounting is. And while there are no questions attached to it, I did want to hit a few high points. One of the things that you're going to see, an expression you'll hear a lot if you work in public health or in any government agency or even a lot of research organizations and universities, is what they call fund financial statements or fund accounting. And I'll give you an example of that in just one moment, but before I go, I did want to say kind of the opposite of funds, where every dollar comes in and is dog-eared for a specific purpose. You'll also hear the expression block grants. Block grants, instead of getting a little bit of money for maternal and child health and a little bit of money for pregnancy and education and a little bit of separate money for breastfeeding education and a little bit of separate money for teen pregnancy programs, a block grant would just give you a big chunk of money and say you allocate it between all of those different programs as you see fit. One of the nice things about block grants is because circumstances change from county to county, a formula that would just always give a certain flat amount or percentage to one county, let's say for teen pregnancy, if all the counties were getting the same proportions or the same amount per person for teen pregnancy, that may not make sense in counties where, for example, some counties will just have lower teen pregnancy rates than other counties. So spending the money on teen pregnancy in those counties, well, the money spent on pregnancy in those counties would have been better spent on another program. And a block grant would give them the ability to do that, to spend the money where the different local counties saw it making a bigger impact. Now, as I said, the rest of the chapter, you can kind of skim it, but it goes into much more detail about the complexities of fund accounting. But let me jump over now to the worksheet. And as always, the worksheet will have a blank part for the questions already here. So you can use this or just enter it however you want, but you've already got a template right here for all the questions. And we already went over all these questions, so you've got a pretty good idea on what that is all about. But I did want to give you an idea at the bottom here for what fund accounting looks like. Now, in a super easy version, you might have, let's say, just one line for a program. Let's say this was about maternal and child health. You might just have a total dollar amount, and that would just be the one line. But that really doesn't exist anywhere. The next step would be for a given program, and let's say we're just looking at the revenue side, because on the expense side, it's going to look more like, well, it gets more complex yet again. But let's just talk revenue side. So on the revenue side, you've got, for this program, you've got a few different sources of revenue for this program. You've got federal, state, county, and city. There might, in actuality, there might be other organizations that give grants as well, government organizations, not-for-profit organizations, but at least here you've got several levels of government who are giving you money, and so that gives you your total grant, your total amount. It gets even more complex. You rarely see something, quote-unquote, this simple, where it's only broken down by source. More realistically, it's broken down by different source, because the federal government has many different grants that touch upon maternal and child health outcomes. There'll be this grant giving this much, this grant giving this much, and then states also have similar programs where you might see state funding, little bit of state funding coming in here. You might see a portion of your retail tax or your sales tax or even your real estate tax coming in as well from the state and then from the county as well. And lastly, the city might throw in their 2 cents from various programs as well. Now it gets even more complex, and this note here says so. Now this isn't a question, but it's just kind of an introduction to how complex grant accounting gets, because for each one of these grants, Everybody wants their own report. Tell us what you spent your $750 on. They don't want to know what you spent this $1,000 for the federal government on. This money is somebody else's problem. They just want to know how you spent that $750. By the way, that $750 can only be spent on certain things. Maybe nurses, a certain share of your rent, and so forth. So for each line here, you're going to have several lines of expenses. You'll have staff, and that might even be broken down between nurses, and then staff non-professional, and then on rent, and then on equipment. Now, keep in mind, this is not one set of columns. This is just for this line. We'll use a little shading here. Just for that line of revenue, that line of revenue has got to be matched to a whole bunch of different type of expenses. And the same is true for every different revenue source. So, while most of you will never actually have to do fund accounting because you can kind of tell how complex it gets fast, I did want to give you an overview on why it's complex. So if you're working with an agency that does deal with grants, you're going to know that their level, the level of complexity, quote unquote, on the other side, for the people who are doing all the accounting, the level of complexity is much higher than what you traditionally associate with business. And as an aside, it was this very chore that was kind of the last thing that was, one of the last things that was facing me. Like, had I stayed in private industry rather than going back for my PhD, one of the tasks they had lined up for me was to help with the fund accounting. And while I knew enough how to do it and everything, it was definitely one of those things that I don't know that I had the right